Fine here. Nice to meet you. Your microphone is muted. I
Oh, hey, do you hear me well now?
yes, you're going through.
Great,
How are you
perfect.
doing? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Hold on, maybe it'll be better with headphones. See if I hear you better. Do you hear me okay?
I do.
I don't in that head.
You're lagging a bit. I
You hear
didn't
me okay
catch
now?
what you're. Sort of. It was just a little bit lag before. Maybe it's stabilized.
Okay, let's try it again because you paused here too. You hear me okay?
Yes. Now I
Okay,
do. Now I do.
okay,
Mm.
great.
All right. Very nice to meet you. I'm Jonathan. I'm the chair from today. I'm
Hmm.
a master student studying neuroscience and focusing on computational psychiatry. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say on schizophrenia today.
Cool. Yeah, I hope you like it. Where do you study?
In Zurich.
Cool. Is it mostly research or do you do clinical work too?
So I'm for now I'm just a student, but I'm doing my master's thesis at a group called the Translational Neuromodulating Unit, where they do some uh, clinical stuff. But mostly I'm just doing like behavioral modeling, so cognitive modeling and this kind of stuff. Um, Still kind of like finding a place to specialize in exactly.
Yeah.
So, and you are, I saw you're at the Hebrew University.
Yeah, so I'm currently a psychiatry resident in at
Yes.
Rambam Medical Hospital, and I also I did my PhD in computational neuroscience at the Hebrew University, and so I continue doing research with the Hebrew University, and I also do clinical work at Rambam, so I kind of do try to do both.
I see. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Should we just check that the
Yeah.
presentation, the PowerPoint screen sharing is working?
Yes. This will be great. Let's see. Uh, I'll share it and I'll just run the presentation. Let's see if it works properly.
Yes. Super. I see your screen now, and I see your presentation. Awesome.
Great. And you just see the presentation itself, not my notes, right? Just to make sure.
Yes, I can see like the browser bar, but I can only see kind of like the slide. So from
Okay.
disconnection to intervention.
Okay. Cool.
And I also just want to make sure that you're okay with this being recorded and put on YouTube later.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Of
then we'll
course.
send you a link with it so you can go over it or show it to someone else.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Good, good. Then we're just waiting for people to join. And as soon as it hits 30 and people have had time to settle in and Carl is here, then we'll start.
Great. Do you see my the arrow on the screen if I point now? Just to make
Yes,
sure. Okay.
I do. I do.
Okay. Okay. So just to know if I need to use it.
Yes, it is visible. Super.
Perfect.
And also just a reminder that the structure of the presentation is around 40 minutes of presentation, and then we come to the Q&A, and then last we have the comments from Carl on the presentation.
Right.
Hi, good to see you.
So Professor Hagai, he was my mentor during the my PhD, and he was the mentor for the work that I'll present today.
Ah, awesome, awesome. Very good to have you here.
I was just around when Nir is done all the job.
I see, I see. Can you guys hear some background noise from my side?
I was muted, so
Good, good, good. No, it's I'll just make sure to turn off my mic. I think there might be some noise from the room next to me.
okay.
Mhm. See, people are joining. Good. Now we're just waiting for Carl to join, and when he's here, then we'll slowly start. But I'll give a brief introduction before.
ניר אש,
Hi, Adi. Thank you for coming.
אה, אני רואה רק אותך או את כולם?
No, everybody hears you and sees you.
מה?
כולם שומעים ורואים אותך.
כי אני לא רואה אף אחד.
כן, לא, יש פה עוד אנשים. אנחנו מחכים עוד רגע שפרופסור פריסטון יתחבר ונתחיל.
ואז אני אוכל לראות את האנשים?
תסתכל ברשימה. צריכה להיות לך שם רשימה.
זה ככה, לא הייתי רואה אז את האנשים. הנה, בבקשה, עכשיו תעלה ככה. אז הנה, זה כל האנשים, אולי אין יותר אנשים. תנסה עוד אחד ככה, תנסה עוד אחד לא רחב. תנסה ככה עוד אחד.
אולי אני לא שומע אותם, אז בואי רגע.
I think we'll just wait a couple more minutes, and if he hasn't come, I'll just check whether he has been informed that the meeting is today. There he is. Super. All right, welcome everybody to today's Team B meeting. Nir Asch is going to be talking today, and he's going to be presenting his presentation called From Dysconnection to Intervention. And just a brief reminder to everyone that this is recorded and will afterwards be put on YouTube. And again, just a quick recap on the structure of the meeting. We'll start out by a 40 minutes circa presentation, and then 30 minutes of Q&A between the audience and Nir. And then lastly, we're going to have 30 minutes of comments and discussion with Carl and Nir. With that said, Nir, please take over, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Jonathan. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all very much for having me here today. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share not only the results of this work, but also some of the thoughts that grew out of it. And I'm especially looking forward to hearing your thoughts later. So I'd like to start with a short personal story because in many ways it explains how I arrived at this project. When I was in the early stages of my PhD, I was mostly immersed in abstract and mathematical ideas. I studied in the early courses of neural networks and information theory, computational models. And around that time, my father was diagnosed with cortico-basal degeneration, which is an uncurable neurodegenerative disease. And unfortunately, he passed away about a year and a half after the diagnosis. That period changed the way I thought about science. I still love basic neuroscience and I still wanted to understand the brain at a mechanistic level, but I also felt very strongly that I wanted the question I worked on to have a plausible clinical horizon, some path, even if distant, toward helping patients. So I approached Professor Hagai Bergman, whose work helped establish deep brain stimulation as a major treatment for movement disorders and increasingly also for psychiatric disorders such as depression and OCD. And I was lucky that he placed me, he had a place for me and was willing to take me in. Over time, I realized something else, which was that I also wanted my work to be clinically relevant, and not only from a distance. So I also wanted to meet patients directly face to face, and I entered medical school. And at that point, I thought I would probably go into neurology or neurosurgery. Psychiatry was not really on my mind. But that changed during my 5th year of medical school when I met my first patient in psychosis. He came into the emergency room with his worried parents. He was deeply disorganized, barely responded to our questions. And when he did, his answers were unrelated to what we asked. He kept shifting his gaze around the room toward things that no one else could see. He did not eat for about a week, and he was in a very poor physical condition. We started antipsychotic treatment, and within about 3 days, something remarkable happened, and he returned to himself. I remember when I walked into the department one morning and seeing him there eating breakfast, which was already something remarkable to see, and he smiled at me. And later we spoke, and I felt as if I was meeting him for the first time. And I think that was the moment I realized that I actually want to go into psychiatry. But why should the global community care about schizophrenia? So schizophrenia affects roughly 1% of the population, which at first might sound relatively small number, but the impact is enormous. About 1/3 of patients are considered treatment resistant. And according to the World Health Organization, schizophrenia accounts for a very large portion of the long-term psychiatric hospitalization worldwide. But even this does not fully capture the problem. In my clinical experience, and I think many psychiatrists would agree, even many patients who do respond to treatment continue to struggle enormously. Many find it difficult to return to work, maintain relationships, study, or live the kind of life they hoped for. Part of this is because our current treatments are mainly effective for the positive symptoms of schizophrenia, like hallucinations, delusions, and acute psychosis. And even they're not always enough, but we still do not have good treatments for the negative symptoms and cognitive symptoms like lack of motivation, social withdrawal, working memory flexibility, planning, and the ability to adapt. And these are often the symptoms that determine whether someone can truly recover functionally. So the need is not only to suppress psychosis, the need is to understand the mechanisms that prevent people from adapting, learning, and rebuilding their lives. So before moving into circuits and models, I want to start with something very basic about schizophrenia as a diagnosis. So schizophrenia is still defined primarily phenomenologically. It is not defined by a known lesion, a biomarker, or a molecular mechanism. It is defined by patterns of symptoms. And if we look at the DSM criteria, then the diagnosis requires 2 or more symptoms, with at least one being delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. But the list is longer. So already at the level of the definition, it becomes almost unavoidable to see schizophrenia not as one disease entity, but as a syndrome. 2 patients can both meet criteria for schizophrenia while looking profoundly different. One patient may have organized behavior and coherent fixed delusional system, and another may be fragmented, disorganized, behaviorally unstable, and show severe negative or cognitive symptoms, and both would receive the same diagnosis. So the word schizophrenia may be grouping together different mechanistic trajectories under one phenomenological label. And that matters because if the diagnosis is syndromatic, then we should not expect one mechanism, one biomarker, or one intervention to explain all patients. Clinically, this heterogeneity is not abstract. In the hospital, I often feel that I meet at least 2 very different kinds of patients who both fall under the same diagnosis. One type, let's call him patient A, can seem at first locally coherent. The patient may describe a fixed delusional story, like, you know, the neighbors are trying to harm him, or someone is following him. There is a hidden plot against them sometimes. And if we accept this initial premise, then much of the behavior appears to make sense. The patient avoids certain people, locks the door repeatedly, calls the police, etc. And even, you know, sometimes at the beginning of an interview, I have this hesitation, you know, maybe could it possibly be real? But as the story unfolds, the global structure becomes disorganized. The whole system is built on some false premise, and behavior that is locally logical becomes globally maladaptive. So patient A is not disorganized in every local step. The reasoning can be coherent, the behavior can be goal-directed, but the high-level models are wrong, or is wrong, and overly certain. And then there is another type, patient B, who is disorganized both locally and globally. This is closer to the image many people have of an acute psychotic breakdown, and it's similar to what I presented at the beginning of the talk, of the patient I met for the first time. The patient sentences do not connect clearly to one another. The answers are tangential or unrelated to the question, and they may respond to things who no other detect in the room. The policy itself feels unstable. Attention shifts, speech shifts, and action shift as well. So in patient A, the problem may look like excessive precision of high-level belief, coherent but false model dominating behavior. In patient B, the problem looks more like degraded precision over policies or failure to stabilize inference. Behavior becomes fragmented and stochastic. And the important point for this talk is that both patients may receive the same DSM diagnosis, but computationally, that may occupy very different positions in precision space. And the phenotype I will focus on today is closer to patient B, the disorganization cascade where impaired precision control produces unstable inferences. And even though schizophrenia is phenomenologically heterogeneous, the disconnection hypothesis gives us a way to translate that heterogeneity into computational terms. Crucially, the primary pathology is not simply anatomical. It is a failure of functional integration, specifically a failure of neuromodulatory gain control. In active inference language, this becomes a failure of precision control, a failure to assign confidence appropriately to sensory evidence, prediction errors, beliefs, and policies. If prediction errors are too precise or insufficiently attenuated, the world becomes unstable and excessively salient. If the system cannot stabilize that instability, inference becomes fragmented. But if the system compensates by making a high-level belief overly precise, that belief becomes fixed and resistant to evidence, and we get delusions or hallucinations. So patient A may be locally organized because behavior follows an overly precise but false high-level belief, and patient B may be locally and globally disorganized because precision over beliefs and policies is unstable. So the disconnection hypothesis proposes that schizophrenia is not simply a disorder of anatomical connectivity, but a synaptopathy, a failure of functional integration caused by abnormal modulation of synaptic efficacy or postsynaptic gain. Biologically, this involves the NMDA receptor dependent plasticity and neuromodulatory systems such as dopamine and acetylcholine, which regulate gain and shape experience dependent learning. In computational terms, postsynaptic gain encodes precision or confidence. It determines which signals are amplified, which are attenuated, and which prediction errors are allowed to update higher level of the hierarchy. Psychologically, this same process appears as attentional selection and its converse, sensory attenuation. So the question for today is, can such a globally distributed precision problem have a local circuit level control point? And obviously, I think that there may be such a bottleneck. And the external segment of the globus pallidus, which is a very long name, so I'll say GPE from now on instead of external segment of the globus pallidus. The GPE is a fast spiking inhibitory hub in the basal ganglia. It is not a cortical paravulobulin interneuron, of course, but the analogy is useful. Both are inhibitory control elements that regulate gain, timing, and routing, shaping which signals influence downstream processing. The basal ganglia receives broad cortical input through the striatum. It filters and compresses that information through a series of nuclei and return it through the thalamus to the cortex. In that sense, they act as a selection and gating system for cognition and action, not just for movement. Importantly, this also fits with Professor Firsten's graphical brain formulation, where the cortico-basal thalamic loops are proposed to participate in policy selection under active inference. Striatal territories evaluate competing policies, Pallidal output encodes the expected selected policy, and thalamocortical projections return these policies expectation to the cortex. So if psychosis involves aberrant precision routing, the wrong signals being trusted, amplified, or selected, then the GPE is a plausible local control point. It sits upstream of basal ganglia output, influencing the subthalamic nucleus, the internal segment of the globus pallidus, and then can influence which signals gain access to working memory, action selection, and policy stability. The hypothesis is that GPE stimulation may not simply increase or decrease activity, it may rebalance precision routing within cortico-basal ganglia loops, restoring adaptive inference as expected in the exploration-exploitation balance. Cognitively, schizophrenia is associated with an exploration-exploitation imbalance. So exploration itself has two forms: directed exploration, which is aimed at information seeking, where the agent samples the world to reduce uncertainty. With this exploration has an epistemic value, and random exploration, which is different. It reflects stochasticity and action selection. This makes the task valuable for schizophrenia because behavior becomes a readout of belief updating. It allows us to infer how much confidence the system assigns to its model, to prediction errors, and to competing policies. When uncertainty is structured and prediction errors are reliable, the agent explores in a directed way. When the model is precise and reliable, the agent exploits. But when precision is misallocated, the system can either perseverate around an overly precise belief or become unstable and stochastic. Schizophrenia patients show reduced directed exploration, so they perseverate more, and increased random exploration, they exploit less. That pattern fits especially well with the patient B phenotype we discussed earlier, that is, has unstable inference and low policy precision. So from here, the question becomes whether GPE stimulation can rebalance the precision routing and restore adaptive exploration. So to test this, we used a deterministic 3-armed bandit or a reversal learning task while recording from both the GPE and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And again, instead of saying external segment of the globus pallidus, I said GPE, and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the LPFC. So we used 2 non-human primates, which were trained until they were proficient on performing the task. And the task was built such that in each trial, they chose between 3 stimuli. One of the 3 would give them some reward, and the other 2 would produce no reward for them. And so in every block, it's changed. So after the animal met a learning criterion, the reward stimulus changed without any warning. So the animal had to detect that its current model was no longer valid, update its belief, and begin directed exploration. This allowed us to separate exploitation from exploration. And after reward, the optimal policy is to exploit and repeat the same choice. After reward omission, the optimal policy is directed exploration using the negative outcome to infer that the rule may have changed. And I hope this is clear. If it is not clear, feel free to just let me know. And if it is, then I'll continue. So this task gives us the behavioral readouts of adaptive inference, how the animal balances exploiting what it knows with exploring when model needs updating. And at the baseline, we see a dissociation between the GPE and the DLPFC activity. So both regions carried prediction error-related signals around reward delivery. So right now I'm talking about the left column in which we recorded the behavioral activity with the neural activity after reward was either given or not given. So on the left, the black line shows the behavioral prediction error, and the colored traces show the average firing rate of DLPFC on top in purple and GPE in brown below during the 2 seconds after reward delivery or omission. But around the time of choice, so this is we're looking now at the middle 2 graphs, the 2 regions related to behavior differently. So in the middle panels, the black line shows the probability of exploratory behavior, and the neural activity is aligned to the 2 seconds before cue choice. So here, GP activity was more closely coupled to exploratory behavior. The right panels show the activity aligned to switching behavior. DLPFC activity was more closely related to successful switches, meaning switches that reflected task knowledge and led to better performance, whereas GP activity was more related to exploration more generally. And so already at baseline, we see a functional dissociation. DLPFC seems to reflect the animal's task model, whether it knows how to use the current task structure. GPE, in contrast, appears more directly coupled to exploratory policy expression. After seeing this baseline dissociation between the 2 regions, we asked how these 2 regions interact. We examined the local field potential activity and found that theta band activity increased in both regions before cue choice. And we then used Granger causality analysis to estimate directed functional coupling between the 2 regions. So at baseline, GPE theta activity Granger caused DLPFC theta activity around choice. In other words, past GPE theta activity helps predict future DLPFC theta activity better than DLPFC activity alone. So this does not prove a direct anatomical pathway, but it does suggest that during the decision period, the GPE may lead to coordinate prefrontal theta dynamics. That fits with the idea of the GPE as an active node in cortical basal ganglia precision routing. We next perturbed the system with chronic NMDA receptor antagonism. We used a mini osmotic pump that was implanted subcutaneously, delivering a continuous low dose of synciclidine, PCP, which is an NMDA receptor antagonist, at low doses for 21 days. We then repeated the behavioral and neural recordings during PCP exposure, and then again after washout 2 weeks after the pump was removed. This allowed us to ask whether NMDA receptor hypofunction disrupts exploration-exploitation balance and how this perturbation changes GPE and DLPFC involvement in the task. So just to keep in mind, the color scheme is black is the naive results before any intervention, then red is the results under PCP, under the NMDA receptor antagonist, and blue is after the washout period. So under PCP, the animals showed clear behavioral changes. We did not formally quantify behavior in the animal house, but they did appear more socially withdrawn, spending more time alone and showing less grooming activity. In the task itself, their ability to solve the reversal learning problem was impaired. You can see it in the success rate down below here. They took longer to learn, they perseverated more, and they showed reduced directed exploration after unsuccessful trials, which you can see in the top line that I just uploaded, and increased random exploration after successful trials. So they explored less when exploration was useful and explored more when exploitation should have been optimal. Neurally, DLPFC activity before cue choice was reduced and became less coupled to task-relevant behavior. Activity before choices following unsuccessful and successful trials became indistinguishable, suggesting that DLPFC no longer differentiated the behavioral context effectively. The GPE showed a different pattern. Its activity before cue choice was generally elevated and remained coupled to exploratory behavior. But importantly, under PCP, this elevation was no longer restricted to the appropriate context. GP activity was still significantly higher after unsuccessful trials, when exploration should be engaged, but it also became significantly elevated after successful trials when the animal should exploit. So the GPE did not simply stop tracking exploration, rather exploration-related activity became overgeneralized, matching the behavioral shift toward more random exploration and less adaptive inference. Interestingly, after PCP washout, so this is the blue now, the animals did not simply return to baseline. Behaviorally, they performed even better than in the naive state, with increased directed exploration and reduced random exploration. Neurally, both regions showed increased firing activity. The DLPFC regained its naive task-related pattern, suggesting recovery of context-sensitive task coding. And the GPE activity was also elevated, especially before cue choice following unsuccessful trials. So this is when we expect to see directed exploration. So together, this suggests that PCP disrupted the contextual control of exploration rather than simply abolishing the GPE behavior relationship. After washout, the circuit appeared to recover and perhaps even overcorrect toward a more adaptive exploration-exploitation balance. Next, we return to the theta-gamma relationship, theta band relationship between both regions. And at baseline, as I showed earlier, GPE theta activity Granger caused DLPFC theta activity around cue choice. This is the column on the left. But under PCP, which is the middle column, this directionality changed and the dominant direction shifted from GPE to DLPFC, toward DLPFC to GPE. And importantly, after PCP washout, the original directionality was restored. So GPe theta activity again predicted subsequent DLPFC theta activity. We also estimated, just using a different analysis, we wanted to test it again. So we examined the spike triggered average between the two regions, asking how spiking activity in one region relates to LSD activity in another. And here again, so the left column is the naive results, the middle is PCP, and right is post-PCP. And the result was consistent with the theta Granger analysis. So at baseline, the spike LFP relationship supported a dominant GPE to DLPFC directionality, and under PCP, this relationship shifted, indicating the altered cortico-pallidal coordination. And again, after PCP washout, the original pattern was restored. So across two complementary measures, Granger causality and spike triggered averaging, PCP changed the directionality of GPE DLPFC coupling, and this change was reversible after washout. So together with the behavioral results, this suggests that NMDA receptor antagonism disrupts precision routing within the cortico-pallidal loop, and that recovery of GPE to DLPFC directionality parallels the recovery of adaptive exploration. Now, I'd like to make a small detour and show you these are unpublished results from a different project I'm working on with Levy, which is this nice fellow here in the picture, in which we recorded from the motor cortex using a 96 electrode microelectrode array into macaque monkeys. So this is not the same experiment. These are different animals, different brain region, and a different NMDA receptor antagonist, ketamine, in a higher dose. But the results are interesting in the context of this talk. So under ketamine, both theta and gamma band activity increased significantly in the motor cortex. However, these activities were not simply elevated, they became temporally anti-correlated, perhaps even mutually exclusive. So what you see here at time 0 is when the injection happened, and you can see how we have these increase in both theta band and gamma band. But if we look closer, you can see, so here we have just an example of 30 seconds recording, and you can see the data filtered to theta above and gamma in the 4 panels below. And you can see when theta appears, gamma reduces and vice versa. And finally, when we're looking at we bin the data into 2 second long bins of data and compared the power of theta and the power of theta, we get this L shape. Oh, sorry, I didn't put it up. This is it. We get this L-shaped scatter plot. So when theta is high, gamma is low, and vice versa. So in other words, ketamine seemed to push the cortical network into alternating theta and gamma dominated states rather than allowing stable coordination between them. And I include this here cautiously because it is preliminary and from a different experiment, but it does support the broader idea that NMDA receptor antagonism can destabilize the temporal coordination of neural activity, not only changing firing rates or behavior, but disrupting the balance between oscillatory regimes that may normally support adaptive information processing. Returning to the paper, I then built an adaptive reinforcement learning model to try to capture the neurobehavioral results. So the model was intentionally simple. It included dynamic learning rate parameter alpha, which represents how strongly the model updates its values after new information. So the idea was that when the model experiences a large prediction error, or when its knowledge about the task is still uncertain, alpha, the learning rate, increases. In other words, surprise increases learning. But once the model becomes more confident about the task structure, alpha decreases, allowing it to exploit what it has learned, or kind of think about it as if the brain can kind of relax. We also added a forgetfulness parameter so that learned state action values gradually decay over time. This means that memory is not perfect, and if information is not reinforced, it slowly loses influence over behavior. Conceptually, this allowed the model to capture both adaptive updating and instability of learned values, which are exactly the processes we wanted to test under PCP. So next we tested whether the model captured both the neural and behavioral data, and whether our learning rate parameter alpha indeed behaved similarly to the neural GPE results. So first we fit the model using the actual, so this schematic is just to kind of have an intuition of what is happening. So when knowledge of the world, when we know everything, then we can, just relax. But when we're surprised or when we don't know what's happening, then the GPE needs to work harder. So we wanted to see if the model can behave similarly. So what we did was we compared the model's adaptive learning rate parameter, alpha, with the measured GPE activity around choice. So what we did was we fed the model the actual choices the primates made, and we simply calculated what would be the value of alpha, and we compared that. So this is the top graph here. So the solid line is the actual GPE firing rate, and the dashed line is the calculated surprise measure, the alpha measure. And you can see that they both look very similar. We then freed the model and allowed it to generate its own choices and compared its behavior to the animal's behavior. And again, so this is you can see the middle graph, the model pretty much solved the task very similarly. And in the bottom graph, we compared how this alpha parameter, how the learning rate was in relation to exploratory behavior, and again, it was very similar. So across 3 levels, GP activity, animal behavior, and the simulated behavior, the adaptive learning rate parameter captured a core component of the exploration process. Next, we asked whether the model could reproduce the behavioral changes that we observed under PCP. So to do this, we increased the model's forgetfulness parameter. So this is this phi here. So now the model would forget more rapidly. And conceptually, this means that learned state action values decayed more quickly. So the model retained less confidence in what it previously learned. And the manipulation reproduced the PCP-like phenotype. As forgetfulness increased, the model learned more slowly. You can see that in the top graph. So it took longer to learn, and it showed less directed exploration and more random exploration, just like we saw with the primates. So directed exploration probability. This is good. We're going here, I should say, from black to red. This is how. So black would be least forgetful, like the naive state, and red is most forgetful. So the redder it gets, the more forgetful the model. So the middle graph, you can see that the model engages less in directed exploration. In the bottom graph, it engages in more random exploration. But more importantly, the adaptive learning rate parameter alpha also increased globally together with the increase of forgetfulness, mirroring the global increase in GP activity. Also, directed exploration was negatively correlated with this increase in alpha. So while random exploration was positively correlated with it. So increasing forgetfulness is not identical to lowering prior precision, but it is computationally analogous to weakening the precision of learned empirical priors over action values. And the result is a flatter value landscape, lower policy confidence, slower learning, less directed exploration, and more stochastic choices. Then to model the washout state, we returned the forgetfulness to the naive value, and now we changed the constant component of the learning rate. So if you see, we have this C, alpha equals C, and then the parentheses. So we increased and decreased this parameter, and this way we could globally increase or decrease the entire learning rate parameter. And this produced the opposite behavioral effect. So the model solved the task better. It increased directed exploration and reduced random exploration, matching the improvement we saw in the primates after the PCP washout. So the same model could capture both states. Under PCP, unstable memory produced maladaptive exploration, and after washout, increased adaptive updating improved the exploration-exploitation balance. So this gave us confidence that the model was not only fitting choices, but capturing something meaningful about GPE-linked updating process. So the next question was causal. If GPE activity is linked to this adaptive updating signal, could directed GPE stimulation rescue behavior under PCP? And so we tested whether low frequency GPE macro-stimulation could improve the animal's ability to solve the task during PCP administration. So we again, we gave the animals the low dose PCP, and now we either gave low frequency stimulation that would enhance the GPE activity, or low frequency stimulation that would enhance the GPE activity, or high frequency that would hamper it. So the results matched the model's prediction with low frequency GPE stimulation, which again would enhance the activity. The animals became better at solving the task. You can see, so I should say the green is 130 hertz. So this is the high frequency stimulation, which would decrease the activity of the GPE. And in blue is the low frequency, the 13 hertz stimulation, which would increase the activity of the GPE. And in red is just the results under PCP. So they showed the increased probability of initiating directed exploration when we lowered after reward emission, and a reduction in random exploration after reward. So in other words, stimulation restored a more adaptive exploration-exploitation balance, low frequency, so high, enhancing GPE activity. By contrast, high frequency stimulation produced the opposite pattern. So task performance worsened, directed exploration decreased, and random exploration increased. So this was the critical causal result. The GPE was not only correlated with exploration phenotype and not only captured by the model, directly modulating GPE activity could shift behavior in both directions. And this suggests that the GPE can act as a causal control point for restoring adaptive exploration under NMDA receptor antagonism. And so to summarize, NMDA receptor antagonism in non-human primates reproduced the exploration-exploitation imbalance seen in schizophrenia. Then the animals explored less when exploration was useful and explored more when exploitation should have been optimal. Then low-frequency GPE stimulation restored this balance, suggesting that the GPE can act as a causal control point within the cortico-basal ganglia loop. There is also human proof of principle published in 2023 that Pallidal stimulation can modulate exploration exploitation behavior. It was done in the internal segment of the globus pallidus, the GPI, there was GPI deep brain stimulation in dystonia patients, which showed that it shifts the balance. And even though it was a different population and a different Pallidal target and with different direction of effect, but it supports the broader idea that Pallidal outputs can be a cognitive control target. So the question I want to leave open is whether Pallidal DBS should be tested for schizophrenia, not as a treatment for schizophrenia as a broad diagnosis, but as a circuit level intervention for a specific precision routing failure. And I think that if first in human attempts are made, they should be carried out only under strict ethical and regulatory oversight and should focus on patients closer to the type B phenotype I described earlier. Patients with unstable inference, cognitive disorganization, and impaired adaptive behavior. One important question is whether the target phenotype should be reduced directed exploration and increased random exploration as a behavioral signature of impaired adaptive inference. And so the next step should not be diagnosis-guided DBS for schizophrenia in general. I believe it should be biomarker-guided GPE DBS in a carefully selected treatment-resistant patient who show this specific exploitation phenotype. And in that sense, the larger proposal is a shift from diagnosis-guided treatment to a mechanism-guided intervention. And finally, I'd like to end with a few thank yous. So first, I wish to thank Liana and Kylie, our non-human primates, who are now rehabilitated and living in a dedicated animal sanctuary. I want to thank my collaborators, Uli and Noah, who contributed enormously to the recordings and to the work behind this experiment. A special thank you to my PhD advisor, Hagai Bergman, who has been the best advisor and mentor I could have hoped for. I want to also thank my family that are my greatest strengths. And finally, I'd like to thank Professor Friston for giving me the opportunity to present my work here today, and all of you for the opportunity to share these results and this broader hypothesis. And I'd be very, very happy to hear your thoughts and critique. And just to say it also out loud, I'm currently working on a full arc for this theory and hypothesis, and I warmly welcome anyone interested in thinking about it or further collaborating. My email is up there, and if you wish to see the actual paper, the QR is for that. And thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to Nir. All right, awesome. That was a very, very interesting presentation. So before we go into the Q&A section, I'd like to ask you, Nir, how can we best help you outline some questions in the last presentation? Is there anything specific, like besides that, you also want some feedback on, or how would you like the Q&A session to go?
That's a question I did not prepare for. First of all, I would really love it to be clear. So if anything is unclear, or I'd love to have the opportunity to make it clear. And then, any other thoughts, and again, I welcome you to, this is something I'm really passionate about, and I want to make it best I can. So whichever way you think will help me and us improve it.
Awesome, super. Then we'll open up the floor for questions. So if you have a question, you can in Zoom raise your hand, and then you can pose a question to Nir. And maybe just to start out for my own clarification. So in the beginning, you told with the pumps that you had put into the monkeys that had the PCP antagonist, just it was specifically targeted at the GPE and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, great question. No, so pump itself was implanted in between the scapulae of the monkeys, and so it was diffusely in the entire in the bloodstream. So it was throughout the entire brain. The NMDA receptor antagonism was all over the brain, not in a specific area.
I see, I see, I see. And I've never worked with anything like this before, but I guess that it would be too hard to get it to target the specific areas.
This is, I mean, I don't know if it's been done. I'm pretty sure Chagai would know how to answer that. I will say that just to get this done, I had a lot of luck, and this is something that in the lab they worked for a long time for the best way to actually have the material in the proper way that would be that we could also work with the monkeys. It took a long time to get to this. But I don't know, Chagai, is there a way to specifically put it in a certain area, inject it?
There is in a way, but it will not be chronic. So chronic application in the monkey, it is very, very hard. Maybe doable, but behind my ability to do it right now.
I see, I see. Thank you. And again, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So forgive me if I'm gonna go a bit high level. I wanted to ask when you said that about the two patient types for schizophrenia, patient A and patient B, and you were focusing on patient B more. I wanted to know if do you consider those to be syndrome-wide descriptions or for a specific subtype or a part of the symptoms? Are these the only two that we have? Are they standard? Sorry.
Yeah, well, great question. Honestly, so when I so this is my thinking that then met the theory, and I felt that it makes sense to combine the two. So when just sitting in the clinic, I feel like, and I'm pretty sure, I mean, it makes sense that we could further divide it, and if in theory, philosophically, it can be, every person is different, so we can subdivide it to every last person standing. But I'm pretty sure that we could divide it to more than these two. But these were, I believe, are very to me they were very obvious, very evident when seeing patients. And then when I thought of how it relates to the theory, it kind of made sense that the ones that are sometimes it took me also a while to really convince myself sometimes that they are in fact psychotic, because you talk to them and it's like, wait, we should check this, like maybe the neighbors are poisoning their water or putting stuff in their vents. I don't know. I never saw them. And so it really, I believe it makes sense that they have a very strong prior precision. And then, but from that, pretty much everything follows, and the logic makes sense. So it made sense to me that these type of patients are more the mechanism would be more like this. Well, the others, which are, these are the patients that come in and the nurse is calling you and everybody, that you need something, you need to call, like they're very unstable. They make no sense. So, and then it makes sense that, and it's interesting. I don't know if, maybe is it low prior precision and then just very unstable, or maybe they have a very, very, very precise prediction error, and then just boom, everything is still surprising, because it's really the same thing, right? It's relative to one another. So it just made sense to me that these two types of patients would correspond with that mechanism. but I'm not familiar. I'd be very interested to know. Maybe this is very well known, but to hear Professor Fritzland later. But to me, it just made sense. And yeah, I hope it answered the question.
I do have another one, but I think Carl might want to say something first.
Yes, Carl, please go ahead.
Oh, I wish I hadn't raised my hand now. There is another question. Yeah, I did want to speak to that specifically. But the reason I raised my hand is I have to leave for a do at the Royal Society in about 35 minutes. So please forgive me. And I got so much to say, I thought I'd interrupt now and start saying it because there's an enormous amount of material here. And I think it would be to do it justice, I thought I'd jump in earlier than I would normally do, just to at least to have some response on the recording and to celebrate what you've been doing. But that particular question did catch my attention. So I'll just address that and then provide more generic feedback. I mean, I think that your portrayal of the disconnection hypothesis applied to precision weighting and the coordination of distributed processing in the brain was absolutely excellent. You described it more clearly than people like me. Um, and I hadn't seen before this sort of type 1, type 2 local global aberrant precision control or precision weighting story, but it does make entire sense from my perspective. So that's why I just wanted to come in and pick up on Rana's question. So the heterogeneity of schizophrenia in the 1990s was largely inherited from factor analyses, and you basically sort of had the notion of reality distortion characterized by hallucinations and delusions, the kind that you might um, encounter in the clinic or in the A&E. So a very florid expression of schizophrenia, usually in the sort of the acute stages. Then the second statistically orthogonal aspect was disorganization, either of thought or of speech or of behavior. And then the final axis would be psychomotor poverty, sort of a more burnt out chronic kind. Um, and it does strike me that the telling that kind of story in terms of aberrant precision control that inherits from some developmental synaptopathy of a modulatory sort that you've been exploring in terms of um, GPe cortical interactions um, can be told very succinctly. So, usually in my world, the primary etiology is a failure of neuromodulation at the lower sensory levels. So, this is usually cast in terms of a failure of sensory attenuation. But more generally, it's just a failure to modulate the precision with the usual neuromodulatory mechanisms. Um, but what would that mean if it manifests as a failure of sensory attenuation? It means that you would have lots of precise sensory evidence to explain. And that would necessarily drive you to very precise posterior beliefs about what caused all of these things, which could be for you and me completely incidental. We could ignore these things, the behavior of the neighbors or the newscasters. We would just ignore them as being purely incidental to our world model. But if you can't ignore everything, that doesn't inform your world model, your generative model, then you're going to have these very detailed precise beliefs to explain them. And they have to be precise because they're being driven by very precise, say, prediction errors, for example. So that now takes you into a world which neatly explains hallucinations and delusions and their elaboration in terms of delusional systems, which retain a degree of plausibility simply because they are trying to explain everything that the poor patient has encountered. Now, so that would be, sort of the increased prior precision that is compensatory for the failure to increase to attenuate the likelihood precision or the sensory precision. But now say the world changes, um, and you are now left with these precise prior beliefs that are now no longer apt. So you move house, or you grow up, you go to university, or you get a job. Um, so the world has changed, but your very precise prior beliefs haven't. So that's what I took to be your sort of the priors are no longer fit for purpose, um, and they become pathological, leading to this more disorganized, um, suboptimal explanations for the world. And I think that that would be your second type, and I think that's entirely plausible. And you hear the same story in things like post-traumatic stress disorder. At the time of the trauma, be it sort of a chaotic family system or some um, adverse physical trauma, a car crash or something, or a violation of some sort, you are now in the position of trying to explain all these very precise sources of sensory evidence. You build precise beliefs about, the consequences of your behavior. But then the trauma goes away, and a year later, you're left with this slightly suboptimal precise prior beliefs that just don't work now when the world is no longer chaotic, or it's no longer traumatic, or you no longer should experience it as being traumatic. So I think that's really nice. The one thing which I think would help that story is to realize that the precision that it has to be coordinated, predicted, and nuanced on many different timescales applies to posterior beliefs, Bayesian beliefs that may or may not be subpersonal, or may be propositional. Mathematically, it doesn't matter. The key point here is that every kind of belief structure is equipped with a precision, almost by definition, which means you can have beliefs about the causal structure, the cause-effect structure of your world and the states of affairs in the moment. But when you move to things like us that also have beliefs about our future, and specifically what we are going to do, the decisions we make and the plans that we make, technically planning as inference, we also have belief structures, beliefs over our policies, actions, choices, and decisions. So one way you could tell that story is that now you've got post-trauma, for example, or post the naughty neighbors poisoning your water. You've now got these very precise prior beliefs that are no longer apt, that they will now lead to a loss of certainty about states of affairs that then get into your planning as inference. So you're rolling out into the future. What would happen if I did this? What would happen if I did that? To build a posterior belief over the choices that, say in the sort of, exactly in the sense of the paradigm that you've used with the monkeys. And that uncertainty now expresses itself in terms of an uncertainty about what to do. And this is where the dopamine and this is where the prefrontal, the basal ganglia, cortical loops come into play. So that front half of the brain is all about resolving uncertainty, about acting, choosing, engaging with the world, which has got nothing to do, which is very distinct from the precision of your beliefs, in the infratemporal cortex or the occipital cortex, the parietal. Parietal is probably not the right one to choose because that is very much involved in motor action. But one way of acknowledging the precision of a belief has to be articulated in terms of beliefs about what. And I think that you can now tell a story that if you have a failure to properly model your world and its cause-effect structure, be it social or physical, then that will get into your beliefs about what you're going to do. And those have a precision, and that precision has to be modulated. And that will adjust the balance between the exploratory and exploitative behavior. And if you're completely uncertain about what to do, then you're going to have exactly the syndrome that you describe. And you could argue at the end of the day, you just give up trying to select the right course of action into the future, and you end up with psychomotor poverty. You just learn that there's nothing I can do, a bit like learned helplessness. There's nothing that I can do that's going to resolve my uncertainty. There's no amount of exploration. There's no reducible uncertainty that I can actively resolve through exploratory behavior. Therefore, why bother? I now have a very precise belief I'm going to do nothing, and then I become effectively Parkinsonic, or then manifest as psychomotor poverty. So I think that sort of progression, which I think if you can tell the story in terms of phases over months or years, and possibly even developmentally, um, is a really nice way to say, yes, I can, there's a systematic story here, and I can trace it all the way back to the consequences of encoding the right amount of uncertainty or precision about different things I have to know in order to make the same choices. So that's what I couldn't miss now, and I've wasted 8 minutes saying that. But I just wanted to congratulate you on that. And I think that if you haven't written this up already, you should do that purely as a story that that sort of mechanistically underwrites the phenomenology due to factor analysis studies of schizophrenia in the 20th century, which has these sort of 3 dimensions, 3 aspects that we all see in the clinic, or I used to see, and you currently see, and telling it in a sort of developmental, time-sensitive way. I think would be really useful. So I'm now just feeding back on and trying to answer your questions. I mean, this is incredibly important and useful work, and it's a very nice origin story as to why you're pursuing this in a mechanistic and translatable fashion. And you've clearly got access to some remarkable invasive technology, and I think the mechanistic approach that you have taken and your focus is admirable. And I'm sure that you will have lots of papers you've done already, but there will also be a whole series of papers in the future to pursue this. So, from my perspective, perhaps the simplest thing to do is just to think about ways of socializing these ideas, getting them out there, talking to the communities that will understand this particular approach, which is very much in the spirit of computational psychiatry, mechanistic psychiatry, using computational techniques to test hypotheses about mechanistic models that have a good process theory underneath. You're going to have a link with neurotransmitters. You're going to have a link with NMDA receptors. At the same time, talks about belief updating psychopathology, and you've got all that. I don't know if you're already engaged, but if you're not, you should certainly try and get engaged. Indeed, be invited to talk at the sort of computational psychiatry workshops. So there are a number of those around. The most enduring one is run by Klausino Stefan in Zurich every year. And if you're not part of that community, you need to be part of that community. And if I can help doing that, I can certainly write to Klaus to say that you should be invited to talk. There's another one run by people like Chelsea Gu and Rick Adams, Quentin Hughes, and I think this year Peter Diane. I think it's been hosted in Tübingen, that moves around internationally. That would be another community. There is a third community that's devoted to computational approaches in schizophrenia, and that people who I think would be very interested in this work, if they don't already know about it, would be the community using things like the hierarchical Gaussian filter that actually incidentally came out of the Zurich group. Now, the reason I mention that is that the hierarchical Gaussian filter is a workhorse of computational psychiatry in assessing fluctuations in the precision afforded various hierarchical representations. So the hierarchical Gaussian filter just is a deep generative model that is or has been up until literally a couple of months ago as a publication in eLife, just generalizing it, but in its normal deployed form, it is just a deep generative model where you're trying to estimate the precision at each level. So it's there to exactly try and model your fluctuations in precision or uncertainty, where those fluctuations now become volatility. So it now has, it can also speak to the economics community in terms of volatility modeling, as written by getting the right estimates of precision that inform your belief updating at the level below. So Chris Mathis, HYS would be, he was the key architect of the hierarchical Gaussian filter. There's also a number of people around the world. And Andrea Danescu is in Toronto, doing some really interesting work along these lines. So there is that little community as well, which you need to reach out to. If I can share my screen, I'm just in relation to your particular focus on simulation. Sorry, using the sort of high and low frequency stimulation, which yeah, I should just say that again that was um, very impressive. Do you mind if I just stop for a moment and just ask a question? No, normally, when that last empirical study where you try to reverse the PCP with simulation, you sort of show the results in terms of three lines, red, green, and black, I believe. Um, Presumably, there were four cells to that design, so that you had with and without the PCP infusion, with and without, and then two levels of stimulation or possibly no stimulation. Was that the case? Did you have a sort of factorial design to it?
Um, so if I understand, you're talking about the when we gave the stimulation under PCP, right? So we gave either a high or low
Yeah.
stimulation, right? So yes, we in red. Do you want me to share it again or?
Oh no. I just wanted to just make sure that I'd understood the experimental design. It was just um, um, when presenting that, if you haven't already done so, um, it sometimes helps to fashion the results in the way that a psychologist would understand in terms of a factorial design, in terms of main effects and interactions, so
Mhm,
that you are in a position to say, look, we can shift the behavior via supposed precision weighting and different aspects of motivated behavior by one of two ways. We can either give PCP, or we can stimulate the genesis of these precision signals, for example.
mhm,
Um, and that means you've got just from the point of view of experimental design, you've got two main effects: the main effects of PCP and the main effect of stimulation. And then the interesting question is, do they interact? Is there a difference in differences? So
mhm,
can I reverse the PCP by, for example, the stimulation? So it's all about the interaction. But to get the interaction, you'd have to have four cells. So with and without PCP, with and without stimulation. And for you, it would probably be a 2 by 3 design because you've got stimulation, high frequency, low frequency, and no stimulation. I'm just, it's just if I was reviewing that paper, I would be asking you to sort of frame it in terms of interactions, differences of
mhm,
differences, because then you can talk about, rehearse the main effects of the two treatments irrespectively, but then show the synergy, the interaction, the therapeutic sort of, if you like, potency of framing it like that through the interaction. Um,
mhm,
Sorry, back to the feedback. There is an embryonic international institution based in Barcelona, which is designed exactly to try and engage people like you who are looking at computational mechanistic first principle accounts of psychopathology. Um, so if you just keep your eyes open for this thing, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but basically it's a Barcelona Computational Foundation, which is
mhm,
like a not-for-profit, is it's like a baby CERN for this kind of research. So if you can get engaged with them at some point, that would be great. The lead lady is a lady called Francesca Castellado, and if you can get in on the ground floor as this institution develops, that may be useful. The reason that came to mind is that the originators of this idea inherit from positions at neuroelectrics. Have you come across neuroelectrics from Barcelona?
No, I don't think I have.
Right. So perhaps your mentors and supervisors will have come across them. It's just that to my mind, they're doing some of the most high-profile therapeutic stimulation work using electrical stimulation, usually non-invasive. So it just struck me that there is a community out there who is really committed to trying to make these ideas work using stimulation techniques, who have also now made this not-for-profit academic institution just to try and get researchers talking to each other. So it'd be really useful if you got engaged with them in terms of looking for collaborations, but also, I repeat, socializing and distributing the work that you've done. So this has been recorded, so you don't have to take any notes. But if you can
Yeah,
follow
I'm
me,
counting on it because I couldn't get everything, so I'm really counting
good,
on getting the
right.
recording back.
Well, I'm speaking quickly because I've only got 15 minutes left now, so I'm trying to get everything in the recording before I'm whisked away. Right, so that's neuroelectrics. There's a bit of backstory for BCom, or the Barcelona Computational Foundation, and then you can read about their their ambitions and how that might align with your ambitions and those of your laboratory. This is just for the audience. It's just the most recent review highlighting the importance of precision as one mechanistic or computational way of reading the kinds of modulatory synaptopathies that may underwrite schizophrenia and many other neuropsychiatric disorders. So that's just there for reference, and specifically the 200 plus references that are contained in that review. And this is the paper that Neil has already taken us through. So where were you? You took this one, did you? I can't remember
Right. Yeah.
which you took. But I think again, just coming back to this notion that yeah, we've got a problem with precision. Then you have to answer precision of what? Well, it's precision of everything that underlies my choice behavior and my actions, and including what I say and what I do and where I look next. And that, of course, has many different um, sort of deep layers to it in terms of contextualizing what I'm going to do next, what policy I'm going to commit to, what kinds of policy, and then I pick out those allowable action sequences that are consistent with that policy, and then I pick out the particular sort of sensory motor contingency that is consistent with this. So, I thought that was nicely illustrated in your presentation, that you've got all of these action pointing, decision pointing circuits, all of which have to be ideally contextualized in terms of the precision, getting the relative balance of different contributions or evidence for your belief updating about what I'm going to do that will necessarily involve the GPE, possibly the GPI, and in virtue of being corticothalamic loops, the thalamus as well. So it just, I was just reminded that the front of the brain is really important in terms of how we behave, what we can actually observe in terms of behavioral responses. So that was, sorry, yeah, just again the recording, graphical brain, belief propagation. Good, that's that one. Um, so yeah, just two observations that may be useful if you had time about bringing the current work that you've done more formally into line with active inference as opposed to adaptive inference. Um, and the second thing is alternative approaches to Granger causality in trying to estimate the coupling and put the precision into your models of the coupling. So I'm just going to sort of this is feedback which you may not have time to pursue given what you've already done and the amount of time it's going to take to actually tell people about what you've done. But if you had time, or another PhD student, this is the kind of thing that I personally would feed back in terms of what you should be doing. The first thing is the nature of the model. Now, you've used reinforcement learning and you've called it adaptive inference. That's that I think is fine, and you sort of gracefully eluded the rather difficult question about, well, where's the precision in a reinforcement learning model? Because you immediately run into the community that think that dopamine is a reward prediction error. But you gracefully eluded that by calling it a learning rate. And I think that's the first thing you need to tell people, that precision just is a learning rate. So if you just write down the precision of the rate in a differential equation, then it's just the constant of proportionality that relates the state of something to the rate of change of something. So it's by a dimensional analysis, precision in the dynamical context has units of per unit time. So it has to be a learning rate. And that is certainly the story that is applied to dopamine. Dopamine is not the reward prediction error. It doesn't have any content. It's the implications for the amount of belief updating or the rate at which you learn, which is the important thing. That's a sort of, I think, a graceful way to use your reinforcement learning model. The slight problem with that is it's not sufficiently nuanced in relation to the different places where you could have a failure of precision. So if you moved to active inference, which sort of grandfathers reinforcement learning, you would have an explicit distinction between the exploitative imperatives for seeking out prior preferences or attractive outcomes versus the information gain. And furthermore, these two things will be set in relation to the degree to which you become habitized, so you become psychomotor poverty, like just because I've learned that this is what the policy I select in this situation, and I don't even have to plan, I don't have to evaluate the instrumental value of making this choice, nor do I have to evaluate the epistemic exploratory value, the information gain, simply because I always do this. So that means that each of those three components has its own precision, which is now you're in a world, a mechanistic world, in which you can now start to dissect the different consequences of increasing or decreasing the precision of these three components. So if I have very, very precise beliefs that I always do this, I basically become a habit machine. It's autonomized. This is what I always do. I don't have to think about it. It's reflexive. It's sort of replacing allostasis with homeostasis, so system one with system two. Whereas if if this is a new situation, I actually think about do planning as inference or deliberative system two kind of thinking, I'm going to have to evaluate the instrumental affordance relative to the exploratory affordance, the epistemic affordance. If my prior preferences for outcomes are too precise, that's going to destroy the exploratory part. So this you can often tell a story where you're balancing exploration and exploitation in a way that just rests upon another another Gibbs exponent, another kind of alpha, but this is just about the prior preferences now that underwrite what you are going to, underwrite the instrumental affordances, the pragmatic value of doing this. And if you get that too high, if you become over precise, then you suppress the epistemic part. If you get that too low, then you become purely exploratory. But if there's no resolvable uncertainty in the environment, then that's not going to get you very far. So the reason I'm sort of pointing to that sort of more nuanced part of adaptive inference, which is active inference, is that you've now got the opportunity to think about different kinds of precision. So, for example, the early stories exemplified by Philip Schwarzenbeck's work was that dopamine effectively weights the epistemic and pragmatic parts with respect to the habits, and therefore it reports the precision of your planned beliefs about what I'm going to do next. So if I know exactly what I'm going to do next because I've now learned that this conditioned stimulus or instructional stimulus leads to this outcome, then suddenly I get a nice phasic burst of dopamine. But if I've got absolutely no idea what all these cues mean, then I'm going to be in a high state of uncertainty about what to do next, and I'm going to have a low precision belief, and I'm going to have to explore or move forward in time until I suddenly resolve that uncertainty and get my sort of burst of dopamine. So there's a large body of work pursuing this but does depend upon this sort of carving up the contributions to a belief distribution over choice, which again is sort of habitual, epistemic, and instrumental, all of which depend upon the relative precisions of the others. If you can get if you can extend your current RL model to incorporate both the habitual response and the exploratory response, which you would call non-random exploration, um, then you now have the opportunity to sort of fit that model and the precisions that underwrite the observable choice behavior in your paradigm to actually estimate the priors of each of the components. And that's basically 99% of computational phenotyping with active inference. It rests upon something called the complete class theorem that just means that for any pair of loss functions or prior preferences and behaviors, there has to exist some Bayes optimal priors that render me Bayes optimal. And it's almost inevitably prior beliefs about the precision, almost inevitably. So what you can do is if you can build an active inference model, um, yeah, so that look, that have this kind of behavior graphically, I'm sure that graphically are very reminiscent of the way that you characterize your behavior. Um, then you can you can do computational phenotyping to estimate the different precisions that underwrite the choice behavior. And interestingly, this foundational paper providing a worked example does exactly use an explore exploit paradigm, this is the standard two arm maze, where with and without instructional cues. So you can sort of you've got choices in play that put pressure on both the exploration and the exploitation under constraints. So I'm just pointing you towards this as one other way of making more use of the behavioral data that you can then correlate with the electrode data. And by more use, what I mean is moving to a slightly more expressive way of articulating the belief updating and modeling the actual paradigm that you used, that you may want to think about. And yes, the closest example I'm aware of building an active inference model, which are usually cast in terms of partially observed Markov decision processes, of the kind of thing that you are studying, would be this that Thomas Parr did for Michael Lasser and colleagues at MIT, looking at sort of it wasn't GPE, but it was certainly subcortical prefrontal interactions in a small animal choice model that involves some mnemonic aspects and possibly a degree of reversal learning. I'm just putting this there as something that you can see what this kind of work would look like if you got into it. It doesn't do what you want, but it's the way that it could be done should you want to build a model and then use that model as an observation model to fit the precisions of the model to reproduce the behavior in exactly the same way you've done with your RL model, that would then allow you to start to tease apart the randomness from the habitual, from the instrumental, from the information seeking parts in principle. So the final point I just wanted to make was the Granger causality. It's lovely to do Granger causality. It's just in my world, that sort of comes to a dead end at a particular point. And the reason it comes to a dead end is you can't put into the Granger causality is not a generative model of cause-effect structures and causality in the sense of physics. Um, it's just basically a description of statistical dependencies in data space. What you really want is a generative model of the prefrontal-cortical interaction. The GPE prefrontal and possibly other interactions. That then you can use the model to optimize the rate constants and the learning rates and everything else in the model that then generates the data. And then you parameterize your causality in terms of the effective connectivity between them. The benefit of doing that is that usually what happens is that the precision now becomes, and you refer to this implicitly, it now becomes the excitability of a particular node, so that the GPE could increase the excitability of a prefrontal node. Now, it could do so in a way that it depends upon the selective afference from the GPE vicariously through to the prefrontal node, or it could just be manifest as just an increase in the excitability of the prefrontal node, restoring the EE balance. So the precision goes hand in hand with the excitability, and the way that you can model that in these what are known dynamic causal models is actually by reducing the self-inhibition. So you have a self-connection. So this takes you out of the world of functional connectivity and Granger causality into the world now of proper generative modeling, where you can now put precision into your biophysical model as a local intrinsic modulator of excitability through these are usually sort of biophysically plausible neural mass models, so it's a sort of a disinhibition, so you reduce the self-inhibition. And this field is known as dynamic causal modeling. There's a vast literature here, which, only a small part will touch upon your interests. So I've just tried to pick out two that might give you an inroad into the literature. And there are tutorials for dynamic causal modeling, and there are indeed sort of online workshops on it. But it did strike me there's an early study in rats using DCM to look at the effects of ketamine, written by somebody who had a fluent knowledge of active inference and the like. I can't remember, but I'm hoping that you will see, oh, yes, so I could do that. And if you can, there is off-the-shelf software to enable you to do that. So that, to my mind, would be the next move beyond Granger causality. You get into interesting issues about theta gamma coupling when you're using dynamic causal modeling. Again, and there is a large literature on that. One way in which that is addressed is not to think about the frequency-specific correlates of it, but where does that come from? Where do you get theta bursts? Where do you get theta gamma coupling, or phase amplitude, or amplitude between region coupling? It all looks as though it's in the fast phasic modulation of the excitability through probably NMDA receptors in the fine lasers, probably on inhibitory interneurons. So you can put that into your dynamic causal model and then try to estimate it in a time-dependent way. So now you're explaining spectral data or event-related data. I noticed that you tried both, and you can either use spectral data features or event-related data features, but you got the same model underneath. But crucially, one in which top-down control of some sort, it may be bottom-up from the GPE, modulates the excitability by having an explicit sort of non-linearity in there that plays the role of the NMDA receptor. So this is again got nothing to do with your research, but it just gives you a description of a technology and an analysis or modeling approach that you may say, oh, I can do that, and that will allow me now to test the hypothesis that the GPE is in fact causing its polysynaptic connections with some prefrontal region are actually getting into the game by changing the excitability, by changing the slope of a sigmoid voltage current activation, and that's how this was implemented. This is quite high-end dynamic causal modeling. In this instance, it was used to look at attentional modulation, restoring the EE balance, if you like, or the EI balance, by a tensional set in the context of a mismatch negativity paradigm. Again, it's quite an old paper, but I repeat, if you read this and thought, "Oh, I could do that in my setting," I think that would probably be a useful way of going ahead. So that's it. That's all I have to say. And now I have to go away. Right. So I'm going to stop my share and just give you a personal round of applause before the. Or do you want to make us all do a round of applause, or
Yes, I think that would be very appropriate. So, as Carl suggested, let's do a round of applause for Nir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll have to go over it again, maybe more than once. But it's been real helpful, and I really appreciate your time and effort and everything. Thank you so much, all of you, and especially you, Professor Kristen.
Yeah, well, let me know if I can help, and possibly you could bring the next chapter of your story back to this meeting, next year or in a few months' time. That'd be wonderful.
Love that. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much again, Nir. As said, I will upload the video to YouTube tonight or sometime tomorrow, and I'll send you the link so you'll be able to go over it again.
Wonderful.
Otherwise, I think unless there are some last comments from some of the people left here, I think we will slowly close the meeting for now. Yes, let's do that. All right. Thank you so much, Nir. And
Thank you. Thank you very much.
very interesting. And best of luck.
Great. Thank you. Be in touch.